The old photograph sits on Elena's kitchen table, its edges worn from years of handling. In it, 3 young men in military uniforms smile at the camera, their arms draped around each other's shoulders. Elena's finger traces the face of the man in the middle, her grandfather James. "We were more than just soldiers." James's voice carries the weight of 92 years. "We were brothers, friends, sons and fathers. Each of us carried a different story into that war, and those who made it home carried even heavier ones out." James's story begins in 1944, but this isn't just his tale. It's also the story of Yuki Tanaka, who was just 6 years old when the war came to her doorstep in Hiroshima. And it's the story of Maria Kovac, a resistance fighter in Yugoslavia, who helped save dozens of lives while losing almost everything she held dear. James leans forward in his chair, his eyes distant as he remembers. The night before D-Day, none of us could sleep. We were just kids, really. I was 19, trying to write a letter home to my mother. The boy next to me, Tommy, was praying. Another was quietly singing Danny Boy. We didn't know it then, but half of us wouldn't make it past the beach. Across the world, in what remained of her childhood home, Yuki Tanaka shares her own memories. "I remember the morning routine. My mother would brush my hair, 100 strokes every day, while singing traditional songs. That morning was no different, except it was the last time she would ever brush my hair." The weight of her words hangs in the air as she continues. The flash came first, then the sound, then everything changed. In one moment, my childhood ended. I spent the next 3 days searching for my mother in the ruins of our city. I never found her. In Belgrade, Maria Kovac's story takes a different turn. Now 88, she sits in her small apartment, surrounded by photos of the resistance fighters she once led. "We weren't soldiers in uniforms," she explains. "We were teachers, farmers, shopkeepers. I was a librarian before the war. But when your home is threatened, when your people are dying, you find strength you never knew you had." Maria's network saved Jewish families, Allied pilots, and anyone else targeted by the occupying forces. "We used my library as a message center," she says. "Books became our code. A requested copy of War and Peace meant danger in the north. Pride and Prejudice signaled safe passage to the south. Every day was a dance with death, but we kept dancing." James's voice trembles as he recalls the aftermath of D-Day. "The beach was red. That's what I remember most. The water, the sand, all red. I helped carry the wounded for hours. One boy, couldn't have been more than 18, grabbed my hand as we carried him. He just wanted me to tell his mother he wasn't afraid. He died before we reached the medical tent." Yuki's story continues through the aftermath of the bombing. "In the days that followed, I saw humanity at its worst and its best. People with horrible burns would share their last drop of water with strangers. Children who had lost everything would help search for others' families. We were all connected by our loss, our pain, and ultimately, our hope." Maria's resistance work came at a terrible cost. "They caught my brother in 44, she says, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "They tortured him for information about our network. He never broke. When they were done with him, they left his body in the town square as a warning. But even that didn't stop us. If anything, it made us more determined." James pulls out another photograph, this one showing him in his later years, surrounded by Japanese and German veterans. "This was taken at a peace conference in 1985, he explains. "The man on my right was fighting against me at Normandy. The one on my left was in the Pacific Theater. Now we're friends. That's the strange thing about war. It shows you how easily people can become enemies, and how easily enemies can become friends." Yuki nods as she shares a similar sentiment. "I married an American," she reveals. "Some people couldn't understand that. But hate is taught, and it can be untaught. My husband's father fought in the Pacific. When he first met me, he couldn't look me in the eye. By the time he died, he called me his daughter. Maria's story takes another turn. After the war, I helped rebuild the library, she says. One day, a man came in, a former German soldier. He had been stationed here during the occupation. He recognized me and broke down crying, apologizing for what his side had done. We spent hours talking. He later donated his entire collection of books to our library. They're still there, teaching new generations about both the horrors of war and the power of reconciliation. James straightens in his chair, his voice growing stronger. People ask me if I'm proud of my service, and I am. But I'm not proud of the war itself. Nobody who's seen it up close could be. What I'm proud of is what we did afterward, how we learned to forgive, to rebuild, to hope again. Yuki touches the peace crane necklace she wears. Every year I fold 1,000 paper cranes. Each one carries a prayer for peace. I teach children how to fold them too, but more importantly, I teach them why we fold them. Every crane is a promise to remember and a hope for a better future. Maria runs her hand along the spines of her books. The library now has a special section dedicated to peace studies. Young people come here to learn about the war. Yes, but also about resistance, reconciliation, and the power of ordinary people to change history. That's the real legacy we must pass on. As the sun sets outside James's window, he makes one final observation. The world today isn't perfect. We still have wars, still have hatred. But if my story, and the stories of others like Yuki and Maria, teach us anything, it's that humanity can survive the darkest nights. We can find light in each other, even in our former enemies. That's not just history, that's hope. These 3 lives, separated by oceans and ideologies, tell a larger story about war's impact on the human spirit. Their testimonies remind us that every conflict is more than just dates and battles in history books. It's millions of personal stories, each one carrying its own weight of loss, courage, and ultimately, hope for a better tomorrow.